Hello, everyone, and welcome to another American Diabetes Association Be a Friend Friday chat. November is American Diabetes Month, and all month long, we'll be chatting with people around the diabetes community to shed light on what it's like living with diabetes. My name is Marley, and today I will be speaking with Chelsea Musial. Chelsea is the executive director of the West Pennsylvania Pittsburgh area and is a colleague of mine here at the ADA. She has also been living with type 1 diabetes for many years, and so we will be discussing the experience of managing our type 1 diabetes while also working for an organization where that is always topic of conversation. We'll also hear a little bit about her life with type 1 and how she manages it every day. Welcome, Chelsea, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited we can do this together.
Yes, I'm so excited that I'm able to talk to someone within the organization to kind of give people a different perspective of what it's like living with it and talking about it all day.
Yes.
So if you'd like to introduce yourself a little bit, give us a little background, maybe like where you grew up and when you were diagnosed with type 1.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you again for having me. Like I said, I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. So I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at the age of 2. And so it was Memorial Day weekend in 1992. And I grew up in South Florida in a small town called Palm City. And yeah, it was a diagnosis that most definitely caught my family off guard. And I've now been living with diabetes for 31 years.
Wow, that's such a young age. Do you remember any of the events leading up to it? Or since you were so young, you're like, I have no recollection of that?
I have no recollection. My parents have shared with me kind of the details of what it looked like, but for me, I don't have any. In fact, I don't even know what life would feel like without diabetes. Like the only memories I have in my life are living with this disease.
Yeah. I mean, I feel very similarly. I was diagnosed at 7, but like I have a handful of memories like prior to that of just like normal life. But most of the time, I am just like, no, this has been an everyday for so many years that
Yes.
it's just normal at this point.
Yes.
Um, so, what do your parents kind of recall as the events leading up to that time, like symptoms you were having, things like that?
Yeah, so I had gotten very sick like months prior to my diagnosis, just kind of like a virus, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I was brought to a pediatrician and I was starting to have some of those textbook diabetes symptoms, frequent urination, excessive thirst.
Mm-hmm.
And so my mom brought me to the pediatrician and they attributed the frequent urination to a UTI. So at that point, I was misdiagnosed by the physician
Mm-hmm.
and just continued to get sicker and sicker and sicker and sicker. So my dad used to travel Monday through Friday. He had a
Mm-hmm.
sales position, so he was on the road quite frequently. And he said that the time he knew I was really sick, he came home and I was just starting to turn gray. And at that point, I was in full-fledged DKA.
Mm-hmm.
And so by the time they brought me to the emergency room, I'd already slipped into a coma and my veins had collapsed. So the physicians in the room were just trying to hit any type of vein they could, because at that point, I think my blood sugar was like over 1200, like it wasn't even able to be read. And so after some like painstakingly like long minutes, a plastic surgeon who happened to be on call at the ER hit my femoral artery and was able to administer insulin. And so at that point, I still wasn't technically out of the woods. But kind of once the insulin started doing its job, I came to, and they were going to trauma hawk me to the children's hospital, but I was at least stable enough that I could be transported via ambulance. But I spent about a week in the children's hospital in Jupiter, Florida, and lived to tell the story 31 years later. They said one more hour. If my parents had waited one more hour, I likely would not have survived.
Wow, that is so crazy that it was that close to
Yes.
possibly having a very different outcome. Um,
Yes.
and it's amazing that like your dad came home and was like, no, we're going back. Like this, something's wrong here, and we need to figure it out right now.
Yes. Yes. What was your diagnosis like?
My diagnosis wasn't quite as life and death. Leading up to it, I was having a lot of frequent symptoms of like frequent urination, getting up in the middle of the night to like go to the bathroom, which I'd never really done prior, drinking a lot of water, and getting like really, really weak all of a sudden. And my mom originally thought it was some sort of like UTI or something like that, because that's always the initial thought when like those are the symptoms. And I remember her driving me to like the doctor's office. She's like, oh, they'll probably give you some sort of like bubblegum flavored medicine and you'll be fine. And I was like, okay. Like I was 7 at the time, like didn't think much of it. And she got me there. And for whatever reason, they decided to test my blood sugar. And basically, I don't remember what the number was, but they were like, you can't go home. You have to go straight to the like to the ER. And so like that is a little hazy to me, but my mom remembers like walking me over to the ER because it was like connected to the hospital and or like the doctor's office was connected. And she was like, I was just like calling your dad frantically and like didn't know what was going on because they didn't really tell her very much. I'm like,
right.
That, like I remember snippets, but not like
yeah.
Then I was obviously hospitalized for at least the entire just kind of like
Yeah. I think my dad was somewhat familiar with diabetes, but we didn't really have it in my family. So I think as a parent, he started seeing some of the symptoms, but he knew that a diagnosis with diabetes was going to be a lifelong diagnosis of disease management. So in the back of his mind, he started kind of thinking the diabetes route, but wanted to continue to trust the physicians in hopes that that actually wasn't the case. But we all know what it was.
Yeah. Well, similarly, I don't have anyone else in my family with type 1, even extended. Like I have a very large extended family. No one else has type 1. There's a couple different like type 2 diagnoses, but like no one had type 1. So Same. I know it was a shock to like my parents, but I had a couple aunts who were nurses. And so they were like, okay, it's going to be fine. Like, here's what's happening. Like, let's take it down step by step. And I remember just like my mom trying to learn as much as she possibly could about like
Same.
And so, and honestly, I still feel like she's trying to learn as much as she can 20 years later. And I'm like, don't live at home or anything like that. But about me constantly, I'm pretty sure. So like through the years, have you changed kind of what your management has looked like? Because I know when I was diagnosed, CGMs weren't really a thing. Pumps were there, but they weren't like as technologically advanced as they are now. What kind of management have you used throughout your life and what seems to work best for you?
Yeah, so I have this story that I always tell. So sometimes I kind of feel like I was like an old dog that didn't want to learn new tricks. Like I was like a slow adopter of a lot of the tech. It's just kind of my personality. And so, it took me probably 10 years to go on a pump. So I was diagnosed at 2. I didn't go on a pump until I was 12. And God love my parents. They would ask me every year, is it time? Like, do you want to try the pump? Do you want to try the pump? And I was like, I don't want another device. I didn't want something attached to me. So, but obviously I came around, I got the pump, loved the pump, been on it ever since. And then, but it was kind of a similar case with the CGM. And so when I started working at the ADA, I was not on a CGM. I was still just kind of doing my finger sticks. It was working. I felt good. I was like, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And I'll never forget, like 6 months into my job here, we had our camp, right? And so we have a camp here in Western PA, Camp Courage. And I attended camp and I see all these like beautiful little kids and they're all marching in with their CGMs on. And I was like, okay, come on, Chelsea. If an 8-year-old can wear a CGM, like you can do it. And that was when I was like, started looking into CGM and I've been on it ever since. And once again, it's changed my life. It's changed the way I manage this disease. So I am very pro tech. I just think that sometimes I'm a slow adopter of it.
No, that makes so much sense to me because similarly, I was asked every year growing up, like, do you want to go on a pump? Do you want to do this? Like, it'll change your life. It'll do all these things. I also was kind of against any sort of camp experience and all that stuff. I was like, I just want it to be there and not talk about it. I don't want things attached to me. I just like don't want to do that. And it wasn't until 2020 that I even started using a CGM. So a good almost like 18, 19 years after my diagnosis. And I mean, it's completely changed my management, of course, because knowing your numbers constantly is very different than a finger stick every however many hours. But I'm still not someone who uses a pump. I still do like injections with a pen and like I love it. And I feel like it gives me a lot of freedom. And similarly, I don't like things attached to me. I even have issues with my CGM. I'll like hit it on a wall or a door frame. And I'm like, I forgot it was there. And so I can't imagine with trying to like manage a pump like that.
Yes, yes. And that's what I always tell, like, because, in our roles, we talk to a lot of other families and they'll say, my child isn't ready to go on the pump or this or that.
Mhm.
And it's not the parent's decision. And I always tell them the same thing. I'm like, when they're ready, they're ready. And if they don't and they just want to stay on injections, like, there's no singular way to manage this disease. And I think it's also what makes it so complex as an individual, as a healthcare professional, the way you manage your diabetes it's all different. There's no one size fits all. And so you just have to do what you feel works, best for you.
Yeah, 100%. That's always my recommendation when someone is like, "What is some advice you would give?" And I'm like, "Figure out what works for you."
Mm-hmm.
There's
Mm-hmm.
so many different options of tech, non-tech, CGMs, non-CGM, like all of this stuff. Figure out what like makes you most comfortable and what helps you manage best,
Yes.
because like the options are endless, really.
Yes.
So, what kind of made you want to work within the diabetes community and like come over and work at the ADA?
Yeah. So I feel like part of my family's coping mechanism from the moment that I was diagnosed was to lean in to be a part of the solution.
Mhm.
And so, once again, my entire childhood, we were doing walks, in my community. My dad served on the board. My parents immediately got us involved within the diabetes community. Most of my childhood, I was a youth ambassador. I would tell my
Mhm.
story at corporate kickoffs and galas. And so I was never, ever afraid to talk about my diabetes. In fact, I've always welcomed the opportunity to discuss my disease and make people better understand it and like the burden that it carries and what I deal with. I think for me on a very personal level, it's just kind of part of how I cope with it. So, I didn't really intend to get into nonprofit by any means. I moved to Pittsburgh to work for another company,
Mhm.
and I was in a transition between jobs, and there was an associate director position available with the ADA in Pittsburgh. And I thought to myself, I have a business background, I have business acumen. I've always done fundraising on a very personal level. I can speak very freely about this disease state. Like, I should give this a shot. And,
Mhm.
6+ years later, I've continued to kind of grow and do what I can to help. And like I said, it's as much therapeutic for me as it is in like helping the community. And so it's, like I said, on a very personal level, I just think I'm a problem solver by nature. And I feel like if I'm not willing to be a part of the solution, it would be a lot harder for me with this disease.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you can do so much great work within like this organization, just in this community, and having that firsthand experience is so valuable. Um, it's really like when I decided to kind of make my transition over into nonprofit and like diabetes specifically,
Mhm.
it was like I have all of this knowledge and information, and I feel like I need to be using it to help other
Mhm.
people. That was kind of
Mhm.
like the through line of like why I decided to even apply to a job here, let
Yeah.
alone like why I wanted to do it.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
but of course, in that process, things have like surprised me along the way. So, what are some like surprising things that you found working within the diabetes community while also living with type 1?
That's such a good question. I mean, there's never an off button. I mean, there's not an off button with this disease, period, which I think is a misconception around diabetes. Like, if you
Mhm.
looked at you or I, like, people would have no idea we have this.
Right.
But I think that, it's hard sometimes to like live with it 24/7, talk about it 24/7. And I'm kind of privy to see like different institutions and how they're coping with diabetes and things
Mhm.
and how it affects an individual. And so it's difficult sometimes to not be able to just like step away. So it's kind of like that catch 22 and like knowing that I'm an incredible advocate for this disease and I know I can speak on its behalf and help drive change where I can, but then like we both know it doesn't stop.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I didn't like I knew coming into it, like, you're gonna be talking about it all day, not just diabetes, the disease itself, but your experience as well. And I was like, "Oh,
Mhm,
yeah, no, that'll be fine." And then
mhm,
when you get here, you're like, "Oh, there is literally no time during the day where I'm not thinking about it or talking about it.
Mhm.
And then even when I leave work, people are like, how's work going? And so you kind of have to restart and tell them about what you're working on. And it's all within the same vein of, your type 1 and you living with it and how you're dealing with it. And it can be very, mentally taxing in that way.
Most definitely.
So how do you take care of your mental health and just a mental break from diabetes, living with it and working?
And I wish I had the answer. To be honest, I don't think I have the answer. I really don't. In being completely honest, I think I've had it. We've both had this disease for so long that there's not a situation that I will experience with diabetes that makes me nervous or that I haven't been before. So I think that it doesn't necessarily always feel as mentally taxing, because now that we have so many of these devices like the CGM, like the pump, sometimes I feel like I can allow my diabetes to kind of run its course in the background, if that makes sense. But in regards to, I don't know. I mean, I don't have the answer. I don't know if you do. I mean, I've tried to be more I've tried to be a very intentional individual in how I spend my time and energy. And I feel like if I'm not at work, when I leave my desk, I try to get out of that diabetes mode, or if it's being all in with my son or going on, even if it's just for an hour of being completely invested in something else and very intentional in what I'm doing, sometimes it's all you need just to recharge the batteries.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it's hard to say that we can give ourselves a break, because you can't necessarily, but it's finding those ways to just kind of let it take a back seat and just
Yes.
kind of allow yourself to have a day where, or even a couple hours where you're not constantly thinking about it or trying to manage it.
Yes. I think it's too just I think you can allow yourself that space when you take a more offensive role with your care. So, I'm trying not to play defense with my diabetes. I want to get ahead of the complications. I want to get ahead of a high spike. I want to get ahead of a low. And I think that that's what the CGM allows you to do, is just play a more, like I said, offensive and proactive role in your care. So it doesn't feel like I'm going up and down and up and down, because that's when it's all consuming. And you feel like you can't stop the ride. So it's the more that I can just kind of keep myself in a steady pace, like you said, in the background. And then I think you have to, I will say though, and I don't know if you feel this way, I completely acknowledge that I was able to grow up in a household where my parents had the ability to get me technology and access to care and affording the drugs, even in months where I know it was hard for my dad, but he never would have told me that. And so I also feel I feel privileged enough to work for this organization where the financial burden that diabetes carries, to me, that's a whole nother mental load that I feel very grateful that I don't have to worry about, because I think that if you had to layer that in on top of just the disease itself, how to financially manage this disease, I think it could be incredibly overwhelming.
Yeah. I 100% agree. The financial stress of people not being able to afford their insulin, afford their CGM, or even insulin vials, it's a whole nother layer that I think a lot of people tend to forget about.
Yes.
But for us, it's a life or death conversation.
Yes.
If
Yes.
we don't have that insulin, we aren't going to last very long. We need it to survive.
Right.
And having to make that choice of paying rent, paying for clothes, whatever it is, over your insulin or vice versa, it's an unbelievable cross to bear, for sure.
Yes. Yes.
That I'm always advocating for better health financial areas, because it's something that I don't looked at this closely.
Right.
And then of course the mental health side is still an all day, every day thing. To answer your question, I don't, or how do you take a mental break from but I do find that just remembering that you're in control and you've done this for 20 plus years, you handle it is helpful. And even just doing something as simple as going for a walk and like helping keep your blood sugar level. Like when I get to the end of the day and my blood sugar didn't have a dramatic spike, I'm like, yes, I did it.
Mm-hmm.
Like I still get that way 20. And so it's really nice to like have that once in a while.
Yeah.
And like that helps you come back to work every day and be like, all right, let's talk more. Let's see what else.
Yes.
In that same idea, do you feel like taking care of your like highs and lows meeting? I know I absolutely taken something while actively participating in a meeting. Do you feel like you're like, yeah, I got it?
Yeah, I feel like I'm pretty good in that sense. You know, I keep stuff around my desk, or like you said, because we have, you know, the CGM, like if I get an alert on my phone, if I'm going high or something, I'll just grab my pump, administer like a quick correction or a bolus or whatever I need. So yeah, I feel pretty comfortable in like doing that within the work, like my day-to-day work.
Yeah. Well, and like in the age of video calls and video conferences and things like that, you can go off camera for 30 seconds and like go grab something, take some insulin, just like figure it out quick and like come back, or just stay off
Yes.
camera for a little bit and no one's even gonna like bat an eye because it's very normal practice
Right.
at this point.
Right. And I think even in like an in-person setting too, you know, I used to work in a large corporate office and, you know, even prior to my role at the ADA. And once again, I was just always very open about my disease. If I had to step out of a meeting and I'm grateful that I always had organizations and bosses that like supported me in that. But, you know, my number one advice to anyone would be like, the more open and honest you can be about what you need and what this disease entails, I think the easier it would be. And I would hope that management, I know this is not the case across the board, but you hope that your organization or your boss or your management is like willing to ensure that you have everything that you need.
Yes, absolutely. So important just to be vocal about the
Yes.
things that can help keep you healthy and safe.
Yes.
Even if it's just like, I need 10, 15 minutes to like figure this out and then I'll be back. Like,
Yep.
it's as simple as that. Like, I need a few minutes to like figure this out. I'll
Yes.
be back. And
Yes.
for their like understanding, like, of course, take your time. We'll be here like when you're ready to continue
Right.
on whatever it was.
Absolutely.
How do you prevent yourself from having like diabetes burnout when we're constantly at work? It's constant in our personal lives, talking about it, etc. Do you ever feel like you're getting close to a burnout?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I haven't felt it as of late, you know, and I don't know if you feel this way, but like my burnout isn't like necessarily as much in like the day-to-day management because like I said, it's like this is the only life I know. Like managing my diabetes at this point, like as sad as it is kind of just like brushing my teeth. Like I know what I need to do. I do it throughout the day. Does that mean that it like annoys me to no extent some days? Of course. The burnout for me and like the mental load, I find myself thinking about the future a lot more than I ever have, in the sense that, you know, I'm 31 years into this. I'm so grateful that I don't have any complications, but I think a lot about like what havoc it could be wreaking on my body that I can't see. And so, you know, as I mentioned, I had my first child and it's one of my like proudest moments, and I'll probably get emotional talking about it, but it's like one of the proudest things I've ever done with this disease and like carrying my son and raising him. And so now that there's someone in my life, and even during my pregnancy, it was like there's someone else that could be affected by my diabetes and it was greater than me. That was a heavy cross to bear. But on the flip side, now that I have a child and I want to grow my family, like thinking about the future, I just want to live as long and as healthy as I can with this disease.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's those like what ifs in the future that often is that'll burn you out. Because as you mentioned, like 20, 30 years in, you kind of know what to do. You're kind of figuring it out or have figured it out, and it's just kind of a level every day. But it's like in the future, like what sort of damage or complications await me because I didn't know about it. It's like you could be doing everything right and there's still going to be things that come up, and that's a really hard thing to like push out of your mind for sure.
Yes. So I just try to I mean, I try to keep every day as good as I can. Like
Mm-hmm.
you said, I think that as living with someone with diabetes, you're your number one advocate. And so I believe that. I felt it during my pregnancy. I felt it since the day I've had this disease. Like I speak up about what I need, what I want. And so, I am very aggressive when it comes to my care, and that I just want to maximize life to the nth degree. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to take care of my diabetes to the best of my ability. And so I like ground myself in that. And like you said earlier, I can only control what I can control. That doesn't mean that some days I'm not going to spike to 300 or I'm dropping in the 50s throughout the day. Like it just happens, but I just do the best of my ability day to day and try not to get sucked too far down that rabbit hole of the future. But when I think about the burden of the disease, like that's what keeps me up at night now.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure it's even harder now, like with your son and making sure you're as healthy as possible for him.
Yes.
It's even more present in your mind every day. And
Yes.
so it's being able to, remember that like you've been doing everything right as much as you possibly can. And like, you're gonna have to like just trust that that's gonna work out.
Yeah.
Like that's pretty much what I'm at. I'm like, I just gotta trust that like
Gotta trust. That's all I
point.
can do. Yeah.
Mhm.
Except now that I have a baby, if I'm having a low and I keep juice boxes in my diaper bags, he always wants to drink my juice boxes. So that was something I didn't anticipate.
You're like, any snack that I have around me, he's gonna want.
Yep.
But
Yep.
me also need to have some.
It's a good low snack with me. I'm like, sorry, buddy, can't give you this one.
maybe a different one, but this one I need right now.
Yes.
So just to kind of like wrap up, what kind of advice would you give to someone who's like newly diagnosed or just like on their own diabetes journey?
Oh man, you can do anything. You can do anything. The beauty and the curse of this disease is that, I feel like I can live like a very full, healthy life. Like I don't think there's anything on this planet that I couldn't do with this disease. But the curse of it is with that comes an immense amount of time and commitment and energy. So I think it's just an acknowledgement of, the extra work that will come into your day-to-day life that maybe your peers are not going to ever have to deal with. But, with that being said, there's nothing you can't do with this disease.
I 100% agree. And I even remember that when I was a kid, my mom would always tell me that. She's like, I know that you have this disease. I know it's a lot of work, but like, it's never going to stop you from achieving anything you want to achieve. Like, make sure you're staying as healthy as possible, doing everything you can, and like, nothing will stop you.
I completely agree. In fact, I think diabetes has made me stronger as a woman. I think I have more confidence because of it. I think I matured faster than my peers because of it. So, I try to, look for the silver linings in life. And so if this was like a burden that was given to me, like, I feel like I've tried to at least like maximize it and to help shape me in like who I am. And so I think that, everybody in life at this point is burdened with something, right? And I think you just kind of have to own that as an individual and just like allow it to make you stronger.
Yeah, I completely agree. I don't know the type of person I would be without this disease, which is kind of a weird thing to think about, but it has definitely shaped how I see like the world and given me a lot more empathy because as you mentioned earlier, no one can really tell looking at us that we're dealing with a chronic illness that we have to manage 24/7. And so it has given me the empathy of like, I don't know what they're going through. I don't know what their day-to-day life is. It could be very similar or very different from mine, but I need to remember that like everyone's journey is different and they deserve like the respect and the understanding that I ask for.
Yes. Well said. Totally agree.
Well, thank you so much, Chelsea, for sharing your story with us from like your parents following their instinct and like knowing something was wrong to advocating your entire life and to not let it stop you from like fulfilling your biggest dreams of being a mom and like advocating and working here. And I really appreciate you taking the time for, this chat. And I hope a lot of people out there are inspired by like your journey as well.
I sure hope so. And it was my absolute pleasure to chat with you about this. And I wish everyone the absolute best in their journey with this disease. And like I said, you can do anything you put your mind to with it.
Yes, Absolutely, 100% agree. Thank you all for joining us for another Be a Friend Friday chat. We hope Chelsea's story has inspired you to never stop fighting and advocating for yourself and your loved ones. Please check back on our American Diabetes Association social media pages throughout the month for more stories and events we have coming up for American Diabetes Month. Thank you again, Chelsea.
My pleasure.